What was your first video game? What comes to your mind if someone says retro? It's probably not this, and a good chance it's not this. For you younger viewers, this might start to get there. What's the earliest game you can think of? Come on, you know better than that. Getting warmer, I'd say. Okay, here's where I think a lot of people's minds land. For a lot of people, Super Mario Bros. Is game number one. It's easy to forgive. I mean, the industry had not just one, but two extinction-level events before old Mario. And those games certainly have stories worth telling. But I say, why not see just how far back we can go? Let's get to the root of this stuff, the origins. This is Retro History, Episode 1. Video games before arcades and consoles. So, how far back can we go exactly? Where do you draw the line from where the real video games begin and the things that are just precursors to that end? Surprisingly, this isn't the only hobby I have that has to deal with this early days cutoff conversation. I'm also very into the history of animation, and let me tell you, the parallels between the early days of these two fields have a lot in common. Let me give you the short version. For the longest time, the general story was that the first animated film was Winsor McCay's Gertie the Dinosaur. It fits everything you expect from an animated film and came out first in the commercial markets, as far as most people could see, in 1911. But if you dig further, you'll find earlier, less widespread animations by a French artist, Émile Cohl, in 1908. But there's also stop-motion puppet works from 1906, so it slides back a little further. Well, what about a movie of a person drawing something, with a jump cut to change the drawing? I guess we have to say animation comes from 1900? Well, what about a projector slideshow of subsequent drawings? Guess we're moving it to 1892 then, and whoops, we're now saying the oldest animated film is older than the creation of film. There is an over-tendency to give antecedents of technology too much credit where it's not due, especially in cases where they were not publicly available, where influence-wise they are evolutionary dead ends. So we're going to take a little time to look at these early technologies, see them for what they are, which is easier said than done since many are practically undocumented for the online era, and then spend some real time on the actual origins of what we call video games. The farthest we can reasonably pull back is the year of 1947. This is when the cathode ray tube amusement device was patented. Thomas T. Goldsmith Jr. and Essel Ray Mann were the patent filers. Just to be clear, this is not a video game. It's got an electronic display, but it's not running on a computing device. It's a CRT connected to an oscilloscope that's controlled with some knobs and switches. The CRT puts a spot on the screen, and when you press the switch, a curved arc gets traced across the screen, which defocuses at the end to make a burst. There's an overlay over the CRT with targets to aim for. Essentially, it's a simulation of military shelling practice. Other analog military simulations of this type are known of, such as Carmanet from 1955 and Hutspiel from 1958. But good luck finding even a single documented image of old military tech like that. We really only have hearsay to work from there. Our next two characters are also analog electronic games. First, we have Bertie the Brain, a 13-foot tall computer made for the 1950 Canadian National Exhibition. Bertie allowed the attendees at the exhibition to play tic-tac-toe against an artificial intelligence. The player entered a move on a keypad, which would then show on a 3x3 grid of lights. Bertie even had an adjustable difficulty level. Bertie's builder was Joseph Cates, who built it with the purpose of showing off his Additron tube technology, which was a miniaturized version of the vacuum tube. However, the transistor came into the picture not long after, and that made Additron tubes redundant. So Bertie was the sole computer built on that orphan technology. The exhibition went on for 2 weeks, and Bertie was disassembled and largely forgotten, even by its creator. A dead end. A year later, we have Nimrod, a computer custom-made to play the game Nim. This 12 by 9 by 5 little dude was designed by John Makepeace Bennett and built by Raymond Stewart Williams. Like Bertie, Nimrod was made to play his signature game against attendees at an exhibition. This time, the 1951 Festival of Britain. He could also play the reverse version of Nim. Like Bertie, Nimrod wasn't generating real-time visual graphics like video games we know, much less moving graphics. It was lighting up bulbs for its display. The video visuals I'm showing are just simulations, so don't get it twisted. Nimrod got to live just a bit longer than Bertie. He exhibited in May that year and for another 3 weeks in October before suffering the same fate, disassembled. But at least Nimrod got used as a demo program for later computers built by its company, Ferranti. I know what you guys are thinking by this point.
Where the video games?
Well, we're getting close. So close that there's good arguments to be made for this next one. This is OXO, a game developed by A.S. Douglas, which, as you could guess, simulates games of tic-tac-toe. Douglas programmed OXO as part of his thesis on human-computer interaction. It was written for EDSAC, the Electronic Delay Storage Automatic Calculator, in 1952. Douglas took the cathode ray tube screen, which is usually used to display the state of memory on the computer, and repurposed it to update and show the moves in a tic-tac-toe game. There's a lot more going on in this thing's favor to identify it as an early video game. 1. It's running off a computer program, unlike the cathode ray amusement device. 2. It's displaying the tic-tac-toe game on an electronic display, instead of the light bulb setup Bertie and Nimrod had. But here's one problem. We call them video games. The graphics are not moving. They don't update in real time. Douglas was in a real Hank Hill mood when he made this.
Do I look like I know what a JPEG is? I just want a picture of a goddamn hot dog.
That might be splitting hairs for some of you, but I've got another reason that I add on top for why only a short excerpt is warranted for OXO. Just like Bertie and Nimrod, this thing was basically thrown away. Once Douglas got his thesis, OXO was discarded along with its hardware. That's it, shared among a couple academics and no one else. To me, in order for a piece of technology to be the founding or origin point, it has to be a direct influence on the next steps. No one who built video games as we today know them ever saw this thing. Fast forward to 1958. You're at the Brookhaven National Laboratory's annual public exhibition. Quite a pattern here, huh? A physicist, who worked on the first nuclear bomb, by the way, William Higginbotham, has an oscilloscope display connected to a Donner Model 30 analog computer. He found out the Donner could simulate trajectories with wind resistance, and over the last couple weeks has put together a tennis game. He even made some controllers for the two-player game. Hundreds of people played the game over the days, and it was brought back a year later with gravity settings to simulate playing on the moon and Jupiter. After the exhibition, the game was dismantled for parts, and god damn it,
You can't keep getting away with it! You can't keep getting away with it!
Tennis for Two checked all the marks for a common ancestor of today's games. But again, it was only used for an event, destroyed, and was left forgotten while the world moved on. In fact, the only reason we know about it now was that the defense on the Magnavox trials, which we'll cover in another episode, tried to invalidate a patent using Tennis for Two's existence. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. But don't worry, folks, a perfect storm is approaching. 1961, MIT. There's a newly installed DEC PDP-1 mini computer. Mini as in smaller than a mainframe computer. And the students and staff want to see what this thing can do. So far, there's been some pattern generating programs that do something similar to a kaleidoscope. Not really what the machine can do with its resources. In this era, computer games are for academic research or demoing computer power. Students, however, started making programs with entertainment purposes in mind. MIT's Tech Model Railroad Club, TMRC, was often associated with this, with things like tic-tac-toe games and light pen guided mazes. The summer before the PDP-1's arrival, a group of students and university employees were brainstorming ideas for programs that could push the computer to its limits in an interesting way. 3 of them, Steve Russell, Martin Graetz, and Wayne Whitman, came up with the idea for what we now know as Space War. The group, referring to themselves as the Hingham Institute, because of a shared apartment building they had, decided that the perfect program would be a spaceship game. Russell had recently finished reading E.E. Smith's Lensman sci-fi series of books and thought it'd make a great basis for the program. Other influences included E.E. Smith's Skylark and Japanese tokusatsu films. Initially, Russell pitched Space War to friends around the community, hoping someone would take the idea and run with it. When everyone turned it around and pointed out to him that he was the one best suited to do it, he tried making some excuses to get out of it. First, he complained about the PDP-1 lacking a trigonometric function he needed to calculate trajectories. His friend Alan Kotick called DEC, who informed him they had a routine written, and he drove all the way to pick up a tape with the code. Russell would later explain, "I looked around and I didn't find an excuse, so I had to settle down and do some figuring." The game was written with 3 precepts. 1. It had to use as much of the computer's resources as possible. 2. It had to be consistently interesting and have every run be different. And 3. It had to be entertaining and therefore a game. It took Steve Russell, with assistance from Bob Sonder and Steve Piner, about 6 weeks to develop the initial game in PDP-1's assembly language. January 1962. There's movable dots on the screen. February. They've now become spaceships, modeled after Buck Rogers and the PGM-11 Redstone rocket. A blank background is hard to gauge relative motion with, so Russell adds a random star field. Now, the MIT community of this time had developed what they would call a hacker ethic, where all the programs people worked on were freely shared and modified without concerns of ownership or copyright. Another TMRC member, Peter Sampson, was bothered by the inaccuracy of the stars in the game, so he wrote a program to display an accurate scrolling star chart for the PDP-1 that Russell then incorporated into the game. And this would happen with several of the game's features. Dan Edwards contributed a central star that would create a gravity well that affected the ship and their weapons. Martin Graetz created a hyperspace feature that would allow a ship to jump to a random position, with a risk of explosion from repeated usage. Russell acted as a collator, bringing all these pieces into the total game. Bob Saunders noticed playing the game with the PD-1 switches was both uncomfortable and unbalanced in player one's favor, so he created gamepads for the game. The team focused on having the game ready to show at the MIT Science Open House at the end of April 1962. They managed to add a time limit and a larger second screen in time for the demonstration. Not only was the demo a success, it was very popular at MIT, so much so that playing on the PDP-1 had to be limited to only off hours. As the year moved on, members of the PDP-1's programming community began to spread out to other schools and employers, and as they did so, they brought the game with them, anywhere there was a PDP-1. Do you hear it, viewers? That beating heart? Yes, Eureka, we've got the moment we needed. Space War achieved mimetic spread. Over the next 10 years, programmers at these new locations began making their own variants of Space Wars, with new features that ran the gamut of controlling multiple ships, cloaking devices, a first-person perspective, you name it. The makers of PDP-1, DEC, started doing demos with it and including it in brochures about their computers. They even used it as a smoke test before sending out a sold computer to make sure it could work at maximum load. Now, mini computers were still super expensive, and there were only so many people that could access them, mostly at academic institutions. But that public domain hacker ethic prevailed, and it made the jump to the microcomputers of the 70s. And even on the mini computers, limited as they were, there was no shortage of new students and guests at the most popular installations, MIT and Stanford. The latter is where a critical moment happens. A man named Nolan Bushnell is working as an electrical engineer at Ampex. He meets and befriends a fellow employee, Ted Dabney. Nolan has a dream of filling every pizza parlor and the like with electronic games, inspired by something he saw at Stanford. He takes Dabney with him to Stanford's Artificial Intelligence Laboratory to show him what's got him so excited. You guessed it, folks, it's Space War. 1970. Bushnell and Dabney form a company called SysIG. Their goal? Make a Space War clone and sell it commercially. They make a deal with the company Nutting Associates, which makes coin-op electromechanical games, and produce a blue fiberglass cabinet for the game with a coin slot mechanism. It's 1971, and they've made the first arcade video game from Space War. Flash Sideways. Two men, Bill Pitts and Hugh Tuck, are also inspired by Space War at Stanford. They also make an arcade cabinet with their own version called Galaxy Game. Yes, not just the first, but the first two arcade video games are children of Space War. Video games as we know them have a clear origin point. Pitts and Tuck were not able to make their arcade system commercially viable, but Bushnell and Dabney did. It might not have been quite as profitable as they hoped. Apparently $3 million in 1970s money wasn't enough. But the two of them could point to Nutting Associates' poor marketing as causing that. So in 1972, they set off on their own. They had to make one change though. There were two other companies called SysIG, so a name change was in order. They settled on a term from Go, Bushnell's favorite game, Atari. In the next episode of Retro History, Ralph Baer creates his own type of video game in parallel to Space War's spread. The home console enters the scene. A Cambrian explosion of tennis game clones, with Atari's Pong at the center. Patents, lawyers, and trials dominate the day. And lingering just behind, gaming's first extinction event. Who will survive?